that's it from us. And these are just some of the disclaimer as an investor, as usual. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Please stay on the stage, and may I invite Joe and Martin to join me on the stage for the panel discussion. Yep. Please grab a seat. Now, okay, I think we are doing okay with time. I want to make sure that we've got a chance for the floor to ask some questions. But thank you, first of all, for your presentations. I think the reason why we have this panel is we acknowledge the importance of the business taking action. The failure or the disappointment with COP25 obviously is putting more pressure on the business sector to accelerate their climate action. So now, if I may, follow up on your presentation, Tim. Now you talk about TCFD. You mentioned your ongoing discussions with your clients. I saw on one of your slides you mentioned board composition, something related to the board. Now I want to go very directly and straight to the point. Can you share with us your thoughts on climate competent boards? I think that's something that we've been discussing a lot very recently.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Simon. So I think climate change is going to be a huge business risk, and I think this is for the board of directors to consider climate change risk as the same way as other business risks. So when we are talking climate risk, I think in the last few days, the World Economic Forum issued a report saying that climate change is a top business risk in the corporate world. And in the next week, the World Economic Forum, our business leaders is going to have very in-depth discussion on how climate change is going to impact different sectors. So for you, I saw so many representatives from listed companies here, and I think in the past, the board of directors, when they look at ESG, they look at this from a compliance angle, which means they want to publish a ESG report that is fully in compliance with the ESG guidelines. But from investor point of view, we think we want the board of directors to be more involved in thinking about long term and also thinking about the business plan in the next decades of years. And that means to consider climate change in your business plan. And this is, I think this is also in line with the interest of investors. The board of directors have the duty to think about the long-term business plan, and the investors, such as Manulife, and I know so many investors are also having similar discussion with companies to engage the board of directors and to ask them to set targets and ask them to set up a dedicated responsibilities in order to manage the climate change risk.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Joe, maybe it's unfair to put the same questions to you, but I'm just interested to ask, within CLP, are you having a similar conversation about, the board and how they can support, climate action? And, maybe can you share a little bit?
Well, definitely. It's not an unfair question. It's part of our business. And for those of you who may not know, the CLP Group Board of Directors actually has a committee dedicated on sustainability issues, which includes climate change. So the board members are very acutely aware of climate change, the risks involved, and driving the company as to which direction it should go in managing and actually helping to be part of the solution to climate change.
Okay, Joe. I'd like to continue to ask you another question now that you've shared with us the vision, the plan with CLP. How challenging it is to actually get it delivered, given we are facing changing situation all the time, and even by sticking to what you've listed out in your plan, it is still not straightforward to get it done. So can you shed a few lights on in that direction?
Thank you, Simon, for that question. If you're asking me to talk about the challenges, I could be going on for 2 hours. So, but just to give you a glimpse of what we're talking about. as you know, the electricity infrastructure, it's involves a lot of assets and engineering and projects that have been built over the years. We basically need to turn the whole infrastructure setup around, and there needs to be massive investments to go into those to make sure that happens. That's number one. Number two is we need to bring the community along as to, well, which direction we should go, what technology we should use, and there would be different views from everyone, okay? Thirdly, I think we need to recognize that from the government, not just the Hong Kong government, but from the mainland government, there needs to be some collaboration in order to make some of these happen. If we were to build a big interconnection electricity path to bring zero carbon electricity from the mainland to Hong Kong, you need the land, you need all sorts of different approvals, not just from Hong Kong government, but also from where your sources of zero carbon energy is, all the way through the path to Hong Kong. So it needs very extensive collaboration and effort from all parts of the community and as well as the government. So just to give you a glimpse of what the challenges are that's facing us.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Now, talking about collaboration, Martin, at IMO, we're talking about almost 200, countries, representatives from countries. We're talking about state players and non-state players. I'm sure, they are very committed to decarbonize, but, in reality, with different stakeholders, and how to convene or converge their vision into something real on the ground. So that's my first question. My second question is, IMO actually only take care of international shipping, if I'm correct. What about local or small ships? You talk about ship designs. We have to have zero carbon ship designs or ships by 2030 or 2035. Now this is probably about ocean-going vessels. What about river vessels that we have a lot here in this region, and also local ferries and other local craft? And then what are the real challenge to get it moving? Because we seldom heard about the shipping sectors and how to decarbonize. And today is really a great opportunity to get a glimpse of what you guys are planning to do and how we can support as a community. So Martin, please.
All right, so a couple of questions. Okay. IMO, well, I suppose you know how the UN works. The IMO is similar, but I think there's one difference slightly at the IMO in that actually the people there are basically shipping. Although there are a lot of environmental civil servants, etc., from various governments, but the basic theme is shipping. And they do have a lot of intersessional meetings between the sort of plenum meetings. Most of this work is going on at what they call the MEPC, which this year they've got first one in April, next one's actually in October, so they've got 2 this year. So a lot of movement goes at the intersessional, and when they come into the plenum, they've already got a plan which they can vote on, and obviously you get a lot of countries, they go into blocks. You've got the advanced countries, for instance. You've got then the Pacific nations, which are islands, which are worried about their future existence if we have sea levels rising. And then we've got other countries which are far away from the mainland. For instance, Brazil's a major one of these. Chile, Australia, there's countries like this where shipping is important. They've got long distances to go to their destinations for where they're delivering their goods, etc. So you've got all these different blocks. So they do sort of try and get consensus, and they do it through lots of committee meetings, etc. So generally they are moving ahead, and having these commitments, the 4 commitments they've made already, that they have not gone back on them. They keep reiterating them all the time. So although it's a long process, I think they will get there. I think the main thing that shipping people want around the world, they want across the board legislation, so that basically what we call is we have a level playing field. We've just had a very good example of this with what we call the 2020 sulfur switch. Biggest change of fuel in the world ever. Happened in one day. We went from 3.5% sulfur fuel to 0.5% sulfur fuel over one day on the 1st of January. It's gone pretty well. Okay, there's been a lot of planning around many years of this, but now that we've got a sort of the new system, it's a level playing field around the world. Basically, people are happy with it. Of course, what's happening is they're passing the costs on, the extra costs for the extra fuel costs onto the customers, and this will happen basically with the new sort of future for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, on the sort of country level of rivercraft, etc., each country can do what it's like with its own shipping. But if that shipping then moves to another country, international shipping, if you like, then they've got to follow the international rule. But if you've just got, say, rivercraft shipping in China, or local shipping in, say, Norway or somewhere like this, or the UK, or in Africa, then they can make whatever rules they like, frankly. But to get to improved lower emissions shipping requires quite a lot of investment. Now, Norway actually has been leading a lot of the technological changes for short sea shipping. How have they done that? Well, they've got a fantastic system, the NOx tax. They put a tax on NOx, basically, which has created a fund of many billions, and they're using that money basically to advance low emission shipping. And they poured literally billions into this. So they are leading the world in it. It's quite amazing, actually. But other countries need to do something similar. In Hong Kong, for instance, we've got lots of ferries here. We've got probably the largest concentration of ferries in the world actually is in between Hong Kong, Macau, and the sort of Greater Bay Area. This actually is about 13%, I believe, of the sort of greenhouse gases and also the NOx, SOx emissions in Hong Kong and the area. So what we definitely need to get those emissions down. Now, what that requires is government, frankly, investment into this. We need help because they don't make a lot of money, these ferry companies, so they need to change the sort of model, like. So it's no different, basically, if the government is going to give tax incentives for people to buy electric cars, they should certainly be given tax incentives to lower the greenhouse gas emissions of shipping, local shipping.
Yeah, I heard a lot of complaints from the shipping sector about exactly that because, you know, for road-based transport, they are getting all the support, but for the maritime sector, they've got nothing at all. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Martin. Now, in the interest of time, I would like to invite questions from the floor. May I have a show of hands? Okay, wow. I will take it in two batches. In the middle, Ding, Waltran, and HM.
Yes, hello, I'm Rita from European Chamber, and I have a question to Tim. Based on your climate risk assessment, would you invest in the shipping industry?
You asked my question.
That's a very good question. So actually, I just during the coffee break, I had a chat with the speaker on IMO 2020 as well. So this is a huge issue to the shipping industry. And I think if we look at the industry, there are certain winners and losers within the industry. So the winners are the companies that are able to, that are more ready to to respond to the regulatory changes. And these are the companies which will have less R&D expenses. So if you look at the company's annual reports or their company strategy, there are certain companies which are already using fuels with lower sulfur content. So these are the potential winners. And if we look at this from the wider perspective, it's not just a shipping industry, but also the supply chain as well. So there were certain companies which are able to capture the opportunity by providing low sulfur fuels to the industry. And this is, so I cannot tell you which company we have invested, but there are certain winners and losers. And I think companies that have considered the long-term visions on the IMO 2020 will be the winners.
Martin, do you want to respond to that or?
Well, I mean, there's some quite major shipping companies who've already gone down the road of trying to improve emissions for shipping, and I think the largest one is CMA CGM. They are building, I think it's 12 ships now, 22,000 deadweight TEU ships, which are going to be powered by LNG, only by LNG. So this is quite a major sort of decision that they've made to do this.
Okay. Okay. Can I have Ding and then HM at one after another, and then we'll invite a response from the panel. Ding, please.
Thanks, Simon. This is Ding from Condor. We're a corporate sustainability and engineering consultancy. I just have two very quick questions for Joseph and one for Tim. We mentioned about the cost of renewable energy and other fuel type. And you, in the PowerPoint, you did mention about local renewable energy is around 3 to 5 Hong Kong dollar because of the feed-in tariff. I just wonder, what about large-scale wind or solar farm? Will that be cheaper than feed-in tariff, and what would be around roughly the cost? The second question is, you also mentioned about some more advanced and expensive technology like carbon capturing and hydrogen. I'm just curious, is CLP having any direction, vision, or plan on those areas? Yeah, if you can share a little bit about it. So also one very quick question for Tim. You did mention that you guys are managing funds that are rather long term for Hong Kong people, including the MPF fund. And as a member of Manulife, I wonder, will we eventually have an ESG fund as an option in our MPF portfolio?
Well, thank you. HM.
I have a question for Martin. You mentioned earlier that there are a lot of uncertainties about the choice of fuels for the future generation of ships. You know, ships operation needs support from the port operators as well as the city planners. So I just wonder, I mean, because we only have about 20 to 30 years of time from now to 2050 to achieve the targets. So that means by now we have to think about the infrastructural support. But if we are going to switch between today's fuel, for example, fossil fuel, maybe some onshore power, maybe uncertainty about the use of LNG, as well as maybe the possibility of having ship using hydrogen power. But within the very short period of time, how can the port operators as well as the city planners cope with that uncertainty? Can you shed some light about how the shippers and the port operator and the city planners can work together to achieve the target, I mean, for 2050?
Okay, thank you. So we have a number of good questions, but try to keep your answers short because I still want to invite other questions. Joe, why don't you start first?
On the cost of renewable energy with larger scale, I think there are opportunities for costs to come down with larger scale renewable energy. But for Hong Kong particularly, I think there'll be, because land is quite a scarce resource, it's rather difficult to do large scale renewable energy projects in Hong Kong. But I think there should be still some opportunities. On the outlook for hydrogen versus carbon capture, I'm not a technical expert on that front, but our position is that we want both to be successful, but we would keep monitoring on which would be more, have more prominence to become economic and mature for use in a place like Hong Kong. We just have to keep monitoring that trend.
Tim?
So regarding the MPF ESG version of MPF, I think this is something that has been in discussion actually with the FSDC is having with the MPFA. So, but from Manulife points of view, I think how to define ESG is a big challenge. So some people may think by investing in just renewable energies or other clean sector is a ESG fund. But I think from our perspective, we want to think of ESG factors as an investment factors. That means we we may also invest in oil and gas sector, but we will work with our portfolio company to help them to improve and to help them to cut their carbon emissions, because we think by improving their ESG performance, their management quality will also be improved, and in the end, that will be reflected in the stock price as well. So how do we define ESG funds is a big question, but in Manulife, we use a ESG integrated approach. That means we don't automatically exclude companies just based on ESG factors, but rather we want to work with the companies together to improve their ESG performance. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Martin?
Yes, on the issue of the bunkering of ships. Shipping, unfortunately, is not a large enough sector to drive this on its own. So shipping basically has to follow industrial policy ashore because it's much larger. We've used, obviously, waste oil, if you like, from the processing of oil refining in ships for many years. Now we're switching into LNG, but LNG, shipping is not driving LNG. LNG is moving around the world because power stations are using LNG. People are using LNG for heating, etc. So that gives you opportunity for places to develop LNG facilities, which ships can use for bunkering. But moving ahead, yes, if we're going to use hydrogen, we'd have to have a hydrogen sort of bunkering capability around the world. We'd have to wait for countries to develop hydrogen for their industrial processes ashore. So what we're sort of hoping is that what we'll be able to do is basically sustainably split CO2 and hydrogen to make synthetic fuel, which is basically we can use the same facilities we have now, which are basically all the bunkering systems now. It's just basically the oil becomes from a sustainable process rather than at the moment comes straight out of the ground. So that would enable us to burn, if you like, current fuel that we've got now, but basically is with zero emissions. But we're not there yet. I mean, there's been some work done in various universities and some research places about this. It seems to work, but at the moment it's very low efficiency. So whether we can get there in the next 15 years is rather debatable, frankly. But yes, it's a big question mark where we're going to go. This is why we need funding for R&D on shipping, basically to take processes from the industrial process ashore, put them on ships and marinize them. That's what the IMRD funding is going to try and achieve.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I recall, Jackie, you raised up your hand, and also there's a gentleman in red. Am I correct? Now, I can allow maybe 2 more questions at most. Can I have a show of hands? No? Okay, then we will have our final 2 questions. Jackie, please.
Thank you. This is Jackie from UST. My first question is for Martin. I joined the Global Maritime Forum in Singapore in October, and the ship owners there talking about the carbon taxation on themselves, a global carbon taxation. So I want to know how the ship owners in general in Hong Kong, how they respond to these proposals. And also the second question for Tim. I want to know, is it the climate risk quantification to investment is a common practice right now, or advanced approach in Manulife? And how much the climate risk will be taken into consideration in the decision-making process? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman in red?
Thanks, Paul Cow from Gold Associates. A quick question for Joseph. It's an extension of an earlier question. I think in one of your slides, you showed the unit costs versus energy source. And coal was by far the cheapest per unit. And I guess in comparison to gas, it was about 3 times more expensive. Now, the question is, do you foresee that gap closing in time? And if that is not bridged, how do we manage this change? Is it going to be passed to consumer? Is there things that we can do as a community, or where the government can intervene to help bridge that gap and make what our goal is being achievable? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Martin, Tim, and then Joe. Martin, please.
Okay. Well, shipping generally is not very keen on having a carbon price, but the EU actually is moving ahead on this. Problem there is unilateral decision made by the EU. That would not be very good, I don't think. But I think globally, yes, we eventually think there will be a carbon price for shipping. But what we'd like actually at the moment is if we have a carbon price, is basically the money that's created from it actually is put back into shipping. Basically, it's put back into creating a new fuel, basically lower emission fuels, the whole infrastructure as well, because it will require literally billions, many billions of dollars to basically create all that. So your answer is, well, let's have a universal system across the whole world, which might work rather than unilateral systems.
Okay, Tim?
So climate change risk quantification, I think it is, I think in Asia, it is not a very common practices. I think in Europe and US, it is more common than Asia. So, but we have seen an increasing trend of asset managers using more sophisticated methods to capture the climate change risk. And I think also because of the regulatory push from in Hong Kong, SFC is pushing this. In Singapore, MAS is also pushing this. And in all other regions in Asia, many discussion has taken place to discuss about this topic. So I expect there will be more and more investors looking at climate change in a more systematic and quantifiable way. And your other question is how significant is it in our investment process? I think it depends on the investment horizon. So many of our funds are long-term funds, as I have mentioned, but we also have some relatively short-term funds. So, for example, if we are talking about the funds that have investment horizon for like 1 or 2 years, then climate change may not be that important. But if we are talking about climate change and the funds that are going to be your retirement funds, then that will be very, very important. So that will be incorporated into our investment style of each portfolio manager, and they will take into the consideration of the climate change risk according to their investment styles and the investment objectives as well.
Thank you, Tim. Joe?
On the projection of commodity prices in the future, it's very difficult to project whether there will be a closing gap or not. For example, in the world of coal, I mean, you could argue that, you know, as the world are more cognizant of the carbon emissions of coal, the demand of it would drop, and then the coal prices could actually drop. But then there are many factors that could affect the price of coal, including supply and all else. So that's the first point. The second point as to, well, are the consumers, the government going to pay for it? I think ultimately in any goods and services that any industry produces, in the long term, I think the consumer has to bear the long-term costs of the cost of production of that service or that product. But in the meantime, I think Hong Kong is a good example. In 2020, this year, CLP is actually increasing its share of natural gas from 27% last year to 50%, around 50% this year. One step. And you can tell the price of gas is 2.5 times more than coal. So our fuel bill that CLP pays to our suppliers will actually jump by 15% this year in 2020. Now, that's a reality that we have to face. Ultimately, I think the consumers would have to pay for it. CLP is playing its part. We're trying to ease that jump by spreading it over several years. We're lending money to our customers in order to make our tariff rise not as high as what we're paying to our suppliers. That's number one. Secondly, the government has actually put out money to all electricity, residential electricity consumers into their accounts this year. All of you will have $2,600 more in your electricity account in 2020 because the government is helping to shoulder a part of that increase of the cost of transition. So I think, but ultimately in the long run, I think to answer your question, for any goods and services that's produced, the customer will have to pay for the cost of reducing it.
Okay, with that positive note, I would like to close this panel. So please put your hands together for the three speakers.